It's Wednesday, June 3rd, and this is now on HNN.
And no man or woman should be without their fathers.
We got all four!
Breaking news, all 4 former police officers involved in George Floyd's killing now face charges.
We have a team of journalists stationed across the globe to bring you the very latest on this still rapidly developing story.
I'm Skylar Henry in Minneapolis, where calls for justice have grown louder.
We will be here until there's justice.
First, we need law and order.
The President and Defense Secretary are at odds over using active duty troops amid protests. I'm Natalie Brand with the Pentagon Chief's comments on use of military forces and racism in America.
And we must all do our very best to recognize it.
For the first time in months, dining in will be an option at Oahu restaurants soon. The guidelines you need to know about coming up on This Is Now.
All right, you're looking at brand new video into the HNN Digital Center. This is from downtown at the state capitol, a Black Lives Matter protest taking place right now. We're told several dozen people have shown up to take part in this. Just one of many taking part across the country.
That's right, and new charges are announced against all 4 former police officers involved in George Floyd's death. Skylar Henry has the latest from Washington.
The crowd let out a cheer.
We got all four!
Hearing that former police officer Derek Chauvin is now facing second-degree murder charges in the death of George Floyd. The 3 other officers involved in Floyd's arrest are also now charged. The news came just hours after Floyd's son arrived at the spot where his 46-year-old father died and knelt in prayer.
I appreciate everyone for showing him some support and love. I thank y'all for that.
Former NBA player Royce White has emerged as one of the city's protest leaders.
There's going to be a day where George Floyd's children decide to watch the video of that cop kneeling on his neck. And if you can imagine that moment, then there's no way that you shouldn't take to the streets.
In Seattle, peaceful protests took a turn last night when demonstrators clashed with police. But in California, most recent demonstrations were mostly peaceful.
Black Lives Matter!
In New York, protesters defied the 8 p.m. curfew, but the mayor says the city did not see the widespread looting and vandalism from previous nights.
Overwhelmingly, it was a very different reality in New York City last night.
The Minneapolis Police Department is now under investigation for discriminatory practices, but activists say that does not give them solace.
Why is that? None whatsoever. I don't trust the state. I don't trust people to investigate themselves.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz visited Floyd's memorial Wednesday morning using chalk to write "Justice Now." Skylar Henry, CBS News, Minneapolis.
Now here at home, Mayor Kirk Caldwell says he understands the motivation behind the protest.
I cannot even know the reality that they experience, but I want to let everyone know that we stand with them. Now, it doesn't mean that here in Hawaii we're immune from racism. We're no more perfect than any other human being.
All the protests across the state this week have remained peaceful, including this protest in Hilo yesterday afternoon, a large crowd gathering along the highway near Prince Kohio Plaza. The ongoing protests across the nation have made a worldwide impact. Ian Lee is in London, where thousands gathered earlier today.
Protesters, this way, please!
Thousands turned up in London's Hyde Park, all with the same message.
No justice! No peace!
They're letting American protesters know they're not alone.
We've got your back, we support you, keep doing it, try and stay peaceful, try and stay non-violent as much as possible, but listen, we see everything over here, we've got your backs, we support you 100%.
Say his name!
For many people here, images of the protests half a world away hit home.
I think that could be my brother or my uncle or like my dad, and it's just like, I feel like for so long no one's really cared because it hasn't felt personal, but now it feels so personal to me.
Demonstrators here aren't just showing support for protesters in America, they're demanding racial equality in their own country, as many are around the world. From Australia to Argentina, Bethlehem to Tel Aviv, supporters poured out into the streets. In Dublin, protesters say it's not just a U.S. issue.
Racism is everywhere. Systematic racism is in every faction of this country, every faction of America, the UK, everywhere.
Demonstrators say they'll continue to turn up until all people are treated equal. Ian Lee, CBS News, London.
Former President Barack Obama is addressing the recent protests against police violence.
In some ways, as tragic as these past few weeks have been, as difficult and scary and uncertain as they've been, they've also been an incredible opportunity for people to be awakened to some of these underlying trends. And they offer an opportunity for us to all work together to tackle them, to take them on, to change America and make it live up to its highest ideals.
Obama just participated in the MBK Alliance Town Hall series. He was joined by police reform activists and public figures, including his former Attorney General, Eric Holder. This was the 44th president's first on-camera comments since the death of George Floyd sparked nationwide protests. Meanwhile, there was less violence in the nation's capital last night. Natalie Brand has new reaction and new details from the White House.
A now familiar rallying cry as peaceful protesters once again took to the streets in Washington, D.C.
We're standing together, we're taking care of each other. We will be here until there's justice.
On Capitol Hill, a heightened security presence stood by as demonstrators staged a momentary lie-in. Militarized police and the National Guard have poured into Washington over the past few days, and active duty troops are also on standby. President Trump defended his law and order posture in an interview with Fox News Radio.
Maybe it doesn't sound good to say it, but you have to have a dominant force. We need law and order.
You've noticed the president has been going down a line of progression, and the first point was allow governors to do their job, allow mayors like Bill de Blasio to do their job, the police power, which is embedded in the 10th Amendment of this Constitution. That's how this country is supposed to work.
CBS News has confirmed that President Trump and top aides were not happy with new comments by Defense Secretary Mark Esper. He said he would not support using the Insurrection Act to use active duty military to quell unrest.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort, and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now.
The defense secretary also took the unusual step of weighing in on the killing of George Floyd and racial injustice.
Racism is real in America, and we must all do our very best to recognize it, to confront it, and to eradicate it.
Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley introduced a resolution in the House to denounce police brutality, racial profiling, and excessive force.
We have the most diverse and representative Congress in the history of Congress, and we should act like it. And in this moment, Congress must function as the conscience for our nation.
It's a conversation once again elevated in the halls of Congress, as well as in homes, businesses, and streets across America. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
Pope Francis is now calling the death of George Floyd tragic. The Pope addressed Floyd's death during his weekly prayer at the Vatican. He also said we cannot turn a blind eye to racism, and yet we must recognize that violence is self-destructive. The Pope also said, quote, "Nothing is gained by violence, and so much is lost." So many people are wondering, how did we get to this point? CBS News' Dana Bacchus takes a look at some of the events that happened prior to the Floyd incident and why many folks are calling this moment a time for change.
George Floyd!
Millions are taking to the streets to raise their voices in response to the killing of George Floyd. But for many, the message is deeper.
In a lot of hearts and minds, black life isn't valued as much as non-black life.
Activist and University of Southern California law professor Jody Armour says Floyd's death was a tipping point.
There was a convergence of a lot of different cases at this moment that I think has raised a lot of a public awareness and made the public especially sensitive.
Black communities already suffering disproportionately from the invisible threat of COVID-19 are still facing the very visible threat of racism and injustice. In the weeks before Floyd's death, people saw the disturbing video of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery's shooting death. The black man was killed after being chased and confronted by two armed white men while jogging. They were arrested 74 days later and now face murder charges. Details emerged about medical worker Breonna Taylor's shooting death at the hands of police in Louisville, Kentucky. So far, nobody has been charged in that case.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
And in New York City, Amy Cooper's 911 call after a black birdwatcher asked her to leash her dog went viral.
What do you do when you're confronted with, those systemic dynamics that might speak to your powerlessness to protect your own life and your own community and your own culture?
Clinical psychologist Dr. Rick Williamson says the anger and anguish felt by African Americans comes from a long history of trauma. And for others, the recent images confront a harsh reality.
We come through years of believing that we're in a place of post-racialism, and then we encounter what we actually are seeing happening, through cell phone images and video. That can be a real shattering of some things.
We gotta stick together. That shattering now turning to a rally cry. Across the nation, people are hoping to make this moment a turning point for change.
We have to be willing to embrace uncomfortable conversations, work through some of our unconscious biases as well as some of our conscious misconceptions about one another. We're going to have to get to the point where we recognize that Black lives do matter.
Danya Backus, CBS News, Los Angeles.
A memorial service for George Floyd will be held tomorrow in Minneapolis, and Floyd's 6-year-old daughter Gianna and her mother will be there. Jimmy Yucca spoke to them about their loss.
He just didn't deserve that.
For Roxy Washington, seeking justice for George Floyd is only part of the tragic story.
He loved God. He loved children. He loved his kid.
What are you going to miss most about him?
Everything.
Washington is the mother of Floyd's 6-year-old daughter, Gianna, who is now without a father.
I pray God when she grows up, she never run across the footage.
We asked Gianna what she loved most about her father.
He used to carry me on his back all the time.
Was that fun?
Uh-huh. It was super fun.
What was fun about it?
It's like you be up the sky, like an airplane.
What would he say to you?
He loved me a lot.
Gianna heard the news of her father's death on television.
She said, "How did he die?" And I said, "He couldn't breathe."
This young lady is traumatized forever. It's not going to go away. It has changed the trajectory of her life.
Justin Miller is Washington's attorney. He's joining protesters around Minneapolis and the country, calling on all 4 officers involved in Floyd's death to be charged and convicted, even though he says it will never be true justice.
You can't put a value on a father.
You're never bringing him back.
Never. And you can't put a value on it. It is a priceless thing that far too many black children in this country are dealing with the loss of.
Washington says she's speaking up so that this never happens to another family again.
I have to be strong because that's what he would want me to do.
Do you hope that there's change so that she grows up in a different world?
I pray that there is change. We got targets on our backs, and it's the truth.
The Floyd family attorney told CBS News they're expecting charges to be filed against the other 3 officers involved. As for the Minneapolis Police Department, the chief says it will cooperate with the state's Human Rights Commission's investigation. Jamie Yucca, CBS News, Minneapolis.
All right, we want to get you over to a live video feed coming in to the Digital Center. This is breaking news as protesters are encountering police here in Chicago. I'm told this is a live feed actually from a helicopter that's overhead in the suburb of Bronzeville. We're told several hundred protesters are there, along with what looks like from our vantage point, we see dozens of police officers. They are in their riot gear. Everything does appear to be calm, but we'll continue to monitor this feed along with many others as the day goes on and bring you any updates as they come along.
All right, now to the latest on the coronavirus here at home. The state health department is reporting just one new COVID-19 case today. We're told it's a visitor who stayed with an Oahu resident. Officials also say they are removing one case from the statewide count because of updated testing information. So Hawaii's total count stands at 653. More than 90% of those patients have been released from isolation, and the state's death toll remains at 17.
Meanwhile, for the first time in months, dining in will be an option for us here in town. Lacey Denise has the details.
Dine-in areas on Oahu can reopen starting this Friday, but bars must remain closed, and there's no firm date to reopen. Lawmakers are asking state officials why they have different rules than restaurants.
There's no consistency in that. So what about other bars who could separate and put only, instead of 10 chairs at the bar, put only 5, and where they had place settings or seating, then they limited it.
Wouldn't it make more sense based on square foot though? So if the bar, let's say, is only 300 square feet, and you're gonna have that 10 people within that, versus if the bar is, 3,000 square feet.
But as you have 1 beer, 2 beers, 3 beers, you start getting more relaxed. It's harder to make sure that people are performing in the safest way.
State officials admit that this is all a learning process and say they will review the classification and possible reopening of bars. Meanwhile, several Oahu restaurants that are reopening this Friday say there will be many changes for customers. At Iliha Bakery's 3 locations, crews have installed new plexiglass barriers. Once customers walk in with their mask on, they'll have to sanitize their hands before waiting in a line marked with reminders to stay 6 feet apart. Yukaku Hawaii and Ruby Tuesday Hawaii restaurants will also be operating at 50% capacity with signs on tables that aren't being used. Customers will be able to scan a QR code with their smartphone to access the menu. Zippy's is taking a wait-and-see approach. The company will continue to offer limited takeout menu while taking care of staffing and new processes to ensure a safe restart of dine-in services.
Students, parents, and teachers have been wondering what the next school year will look like. Well, today the Department of Education released new guidelines for reopening campuses in the fall. In classrooms, the DOE says at least 3 feet must be between each seat, including group tables, and there should be at least 6 feet of distance if students are seated facing each other. Face coverings must be worn when outside the classroom, and individually plated meals are to be eaten inside classes or at a designated outdoor location. If students are eating in the cafeteria, distancing rules do apply. High touch point areas will be disinfected frequently, and hand soap and sanitizer will be available at all times. And for school buses, anyone riding the bus, including the driver, must wear a face covering. The school superintendent says she's also considering staggering school reopening dates and allowing some distance learning for 6th to 12th graders.
We're collecting data from our parents in the form of a survey, from our secondary school students, from our teachers, and we're also collecting data from all of our school principals. What were some of the struggles? What were some of the things that worked well? How many devices do our schools have?
The DOE says it also bought 10,000 new devices for students without access to technology.
Now, other states across the country are also moving forward with reopening plans. Nancy Chin joins us now from New York.
Congratulations to the people of the state of New York. Look at what you did.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo celebrated the latest state data on the coronavirus outbreak, including hospitalized patients.
New COVID cases walking in the door is at an all-time low, 154.
But after days of protests and unrest in New York and across the country, there are major concerns the large crowds could spark new surges.
I'm very worried also that protest is leading to the potential of the spread of the coronavirus. And that is not a minor matter at this point.
New York City is still on track to begin phase 1 of its reopening on Monday. Parts of upstate New York are moving into phase 2, which allows professional services to resume as well as retail. Chicago will proceed into phase 3 Wednesday as planned, despite protests there. That includes opening the city's hotels. Las Vegas needs big wins when its casinos start to reopen Thursday. A sneak peek inside Bellagio shows contactless check-in, gaming tables with dividers, and hand-washing stations.
We've had those specially designed, developed, and installed here
at all of our casinos. Those will be installed, so if you want to go wash your hands, you'll be able to do so. If you want to be able to grab a mask, we've got that close by as well.
A new CBS News poll shows more than half of those surveyed think states reopening over the next few months will make the outbreak worse. About a quarter believe it will have no effect. Already, one area has seen a setback. Washington, D.C. had a spike in cases. Nancy Chen, CBS News, New York.
A forceful statement from Ben & Jerry's amid the nationwide protests against racial injustice. The ice cream company is calling on Americans to, quote, dismantle white supremacy and grapple with the sins of our past. Ben & Jerry's said George Floyd's death was the result of, quote, inhumane police brutality that is perpetuated by a culture of white supremacy. And the company called on President Trump to disavow white supremacist and nationalist groups that overtly support him. Ben & Jerry's had a long history of political activism under founders Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield.
All right, now that disturbing video, George Floyd's death that we've all seen by now, has really led to some difficult conversations for families across the country. Elise Preston has more on how you can talk to your kids about this.
7-year-old Aiden is a fun-loving and curious kid, but his mother Imani worries in today's society not everyone sees him that way. This week, they've had to discuss the video of George Floyd.
I think he's asking the question that everybody asks, and that's why. And that's what I've been having to explain to him, why. And why is racism is a big thing in America.
Dr. Nia Hurd-Garris studies racism and its impact on children at Chicago's Lurie Children's Hospital. She says vicarious or secondhand racism can lead to anxiety, depression, and feelings of isolation.
When the victim looks like you may carry a heavier burden in that, and thinking that could be my mom, that could be me, that could be my brother.
Dr. Hurd-Garris believes families of all ethnicities should talk about race. She suggests approaching the subject from a historical view and highlighting more recent events. She stresses starting the conversation before children see images in the media.
Because you make sense of the world for your child. In order to move us to a more anti-racist society, we've got to be willing to have these conversations.
The talks can start as early as 2 years old and should be age appropriate as children get older. Parents should ask kids what they've seen and how they're feeling. You can reassure younger kids about what you're doing to keep them safe. For older kids, it can be a teachable moment to discuss if they have experienced or witnessed racism.
I think no matter what age you are, no matter what race you are, I think this hit everybody because it's something that just can't be ignored anymore, and ignoring it and not teaching your kids about it is such a disservice to them.
Imani hopes having the honest conversations will lead to change. Elise Preston, CBS News, New York.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here at This Is Now. We got a bunch we're working on for you for our evening newscast, including a one-on-one interview with Governor Ige. So you're going to want to watch for that. That's coming up today at 5. Until then, guys, stay safe out there and have a great day.